great to see you, and it's great to have you joining us live on In Conversation. We've been trying to make this happen for a while, haven't we? So it's a great pleasure to have you here today.
Indeed, we have.
I know, between technical hiccups, time differences, and our busy schedules, it's been a while, but it's great to have you on here. And again, it's great to have you because we're celebrating Black History Month as well, and you are the third in our special celebratory series discussing Black history, African diaspora, and scholarship coming from like Black intelligentsia. So it's great to have you on here. And of course, we've got a few things to discuss. Most notably, probably the book that you published with Intellect, Keeping It Real: Essays on Contemporary Race in America, which has been out since 2019. As we're going to get into that in a minute, but you know, it's funny because you definitely captured the zeitgeist, and you know, I think you could see change was coming, and also that some of the issues and articles that you raised were going to be projected right there into the mainstream debate. And you know, you basically were ahead of the field in that sense. So it'd be very interesting to speak to you about that, and to speak about how you think things maybe have changed and what the future holds. But before we get into some of those specifics, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? So first of all, where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Tennessee. I'm a professor of history, African American studies, gender and sexuality studies at East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee. I've been here a professor for 25 years now, and like I said, gender, race, pop culture, nonfiction, those are some of my areas of interest, and of scholarship, and as well. So I'm a native of the state of Delaware, and I got my bachelor's degree from the University of Delaware, my master's degree from the University of Delaware as well, and I received my doctorate, earned my doctorate rather, from the University of Maine at Orono. Okay,
and then you've been based and working out of East Tennessee for over 25 years. So since the 90s. So that's well, first of all, what a milestone. And you guess you must have seen a lot of things change over the time within Tennessee, within the academic system. It must be interesting to have observed that from the perspective of one institution.
Absolutely. I mean, yes. I mean, I got here in 1997, and like I said, yes, and I've seen a lot of change over the past quarter of a century, really, and almost a quarter of a century. And academia is going through a lot of transformations. It was going through some transformations when I really started in academia. The 90s was a time of the culture wars, and particularly English and history, and the discipline I was involved in, you know, history, about what is the real history. We're seeing that now in the critical race theory, art of abuse, and those type of things. So they were there then. They've just become more pronounced a little more now, in a sense, as well. But they were always there, but they were kind of more likely confined to the academic realm. Now they've reached and spilled out into the public realm. So yes, you've seen a lot of change. You know, tenure, the issue of tenure is certainly becoming more and more of a factor. Schools, some of the smaller arts colleges are beginning to close down because they don't have the funding, or those who can are merging, you know, with others, you know, other colleges. So there is a lot of, you know, significant transformations, and not all of it's really positive, so or good. So.
No, I understand. It's definitely a difficult time, and I think we're facing a lot of obviously financial trials and tribulations, and of course the agenda has changed, and there's almost more on it now to focus on. So yeah, I can see why, certainly in smaller institutions, why they'd be suffering. And that's something, of course, we see in publishing as well. A lot of our partners are struggling from, you know, institutions and associations. But so yeah, let's talk a little bit more about sort of critical race theory and things of that nature, because that's obviously a hot topic right now in North America and in the US, where we're both based. But it's interesting you say, so that's something that you remember being on the agenda or being discussed as part of the culture wars within the subject. Something's going bump. Gotcha. Yeah. So how do you feel the content has changed, or do you feel it's basically there's people advocating the same kind of reappraisal of the education system to present or not alternative histories, but marginalized histories, forgotten histories, histories that have been erased, I suppose, by the white dominant forces within academia over the years? Or do you feel that this kind of it has changed, or is it similar into what was presented when you were sort of there in the?
I think what you see with critical race theory, can you hear me?
I can, sir, yes.
I think what you're seeing right now, critical race theory, first of all, is not taught in the K through 12 system. That's what's argued right now. You're seeing a lot of people, particularly Republicans and right-wing politicians, who are making the argument or trying to make the false argument that critical race theory is being taught to their kids, they're indoctrinating and stuff, which is simply not the case. Critical race theory is not taught. It's really not even taught at the undergraduate level, unless you're probably a jurisprudence law major. Other than that, it's taught pretty much in law schools and at the post-undergraduate level. So it's simply not taught to elementary school kids. So that's a misnomer. That's a falsehood. So that is, but it's a topic that's being used and weaponized by the conservative right in an effort to address, in an effort for them to. It's a wedge issue. They're using it as a wedge issue to rally their support.
Yeah.
In an effort to rally their base in an effort, to accomplish other goals.
I've got you. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about that as well. So, first of all, I was reading a really interesting thing through sort of a few different websites earlier on about the psychological damage that can be caused by people being taught that their history started with slavery, and that's I suppose what means that kind of like what we were taught, like when I was growing up as well, is sort of the history of the African diaspora being based from slavery forwards. And just what do you think? Do you see that being psychologically damaging to say African Americans who their history starts with slavery in terms of what they're taught by mainstream education, or do you think that's not the case? And also, what do you think we should be teaching? How can we, what do you think should be part of critical race theory?
No, I don't think, to answer your first part of your question, no, I don't think teaching slavery is damaging to necessarily black students or white students. I think it needs to be taught. Slavery was an instrumental, crucial factor in the history of America, and it is with us. The effects of it still reign with us today. We see that, as far as the psychological trauma that has faced many African Americans, the economic disparity that affects many African Americans, a lot of that has to do with slavery, race and everything else, as well. So those centuries later, those factors are still with us, and we can't pretend to try to pretend that they don't exist, which is what some people would like to do. They want to talk about American exceptionalism and those dynamics. Well, when you talk about history, especially when you talk about the history of race and gender in America and things like that as well, a lot of it's ugly. It's not blue skies and apple pie. Okay, it's really, really some very gritty, untoward behavior that took place, whether it's misogyny against women, whether it's racism against African Americans, Latino Americans, Asians, which there was, people of color in general, and other indigenous populations and Native Americans. That's a story within itself. The indescribable mistreatment of certain groups and stuff, they need to be taught. It doesn't mean that you're trying to tell white kids or white people that they're bad and evil or anything of that nature, but you want to, like the title of my book, you got to keep it real and tell it like it is. And I think that we're not doing ourselves any service, or we're doing ourselves, quite frankly, a grave disservice by trying to gloss over these type of things and not really get into them. That's where the white fragility, I believe, comes in.
Yeah. Well, for you then, if we're going to be revisionist, or if we're going to just address these issues, what would you like to see taught, or what do you think are key issues that are no-brainers for you, that would help create actual change in society, perhaps, if they were taught more widely, to broaden our horizons and understanding different cultures?
Well, I hesitate to use that term revisionist, because revisionist can be used as a double-edged sword. I think that it could be, it's something, some of the history needs to be revised because it hasn't been told accurately. A lot of times people on the right call it revisionist because they don't want to hear the truth. A lot of it's been, it's been misinterpreted. And, like there was a good example, like in Alabama, Mississippi, where the white papers actually were the ones who, there was a mob that really attacked this town in Mississippi and, forced all the blacks out and burned them and killed others. But then, they wrote in the paper that was the Negro mobs were violent and everything else. They turned it around, made it seem like the blacks were the aggressors when that simply was not the case. So some of that history does need to be revised. You're right. But I think that it has to be the truth. When it comes to history, the truth has to be told. When we talk about history, and like the term itself, his story can, his story might differ from her story, their story, our story. That's why the term comes from his story. And history is through the eyes of who writes it. You could write a book on the 60s. I could write a book on the 60s and come to two totally different conclusions, based on our life experiences, our biases, and other things as well. Doesn't mean what we wrote in the book could not be accurate. But the truth is, we're writing from our own perspectives, and history is through the eyes of the victors who writes it and those who are in power. So we have to look at that. But as far as your second question about what we include, yes, slavery will be a part of American history. We have to include that. That's going to be a very, very crucial part of American history. We need to know about the Revolutionary War. Those type of things are very, very crucial. But we also need to know about the history of indigenous people, women, other marginalized groups. That all is American history. And to pretend, for the longest part, we've always looked at what, the revolution. We've always looked at kind of, diplomatic history, which in of itself is, I think that's a safer type of history, and it's not, it doesn't really get into the grittiness, which is an important area of history, although it's more likely diplomatic history now is kind of more international studies. It's not really in the field of history. It's kind of a marginalized history now. It's not as prominent, but it used to be extremely prominent. But I think it was a more of a safer type of history, diplomacy. It didn't really look at the nuts and bolts and the more gritty aspects of American history when it dealt with the history of women and people of color, marginalized groups, indigenous people. And I think that that came along in the 90s and people started throwing out the history war, historical significance. Well, what do you consider historical significance? What is traditional history? Traditional history, all history has a tradition to it. So that's, so it's not really to be up for debate. So, and I think it's like, I think some people are like, well, my history is more important than your history, or it is. I think this right back to the point. Well, I want to talk about this as opposed to this because this makes me uncomfortable. You wouldn't teach, for example, things evolve and change over time. You wouldn't teach, you and I, if we were good chemistry teachers, I'm not a chemist, I wouldn't teach chemistry today in 2021 the way I would have in 1961. Mm-hmm. Okay, or I probably shouldn't, anyway, but I'm thinking, things evolve and change over time. Yeah, okay, so you know what I mean? We don't want to ignore the great, the things happen in history, but we also have to be cognizant of, updated works and things as well.
Yeah. That's a very good point, I think. I think for me as well, over the last couple of years, and really as a result of some of the things that have happened over the last decade, which we'll get into because it's one of the main streams in your book, but especially since, the tragic murder of George Floyd, I think one of the things we've been, there's a lot more discussion, a lot more education around privilege, around unconscious bias, things like white fragility and things like that. And I think that's a really good thing because, we've really got to look ourselves in the mirror and assess things like privilege. And I think that's been a definite change almost in the zeitgeist, I suppose you could say, in society and how it perceives itself. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Thoughts on it? What was the last part again?
Well, just in the fact that it seems that things have, there's been a shift that we're more willing and open to discuss and to try to, not, certain echelons anyway, to educate ourselves about our privilege, whatever it might be, and also about things like unconscious bias, which I think have been very important, within the workplace, within education, within schools, in society in general. And then, do you see that as being quite a prominent shift that's maybe going to affect some real change, or do you just think it's maybe it's more piecemeal and social media and gaslighting and all of that kind of stuff?
I think it's a little bit of all those. I think for some people, I think it's genuine. I think some people saw the George Floyd situation and it really had a profound effect on them, impact on them, and they were really shocked. You know, Black America's been saying, "Look, this has been happening for a while. Look, this is happening," and I think a lot of white Americans saw it and said, "Okay, well, you know what? I saw it with my own eyes." You know, and I think, you know, yes, this is true. This is really happening. You know, and I think it sparked a lot of people to take to the streets. You know, I think the COVID-19 pandemic had a lot to do with it too. People were home and they, you know, theirs as well. But I think there are a lot of people who really saw that were shocked by what they had seen, you know, that the callousness of Derek Chauvin, you know, things as well, as well. And I think that, so yes, I think they had a lot to do with it. I think some people, like anything else, you know, use any kind of tragedy or any kind of situation for their own benefit, you know, to advance their own cause. So yeah, you're going to have grifters who capitalize off those type of things, but you're going to also have individuals who are definitely committed to, you know, achieving social justice and, you know, working toward any kind of humanity. So I mean, to answer your question, I think it's, you know, different people responded to the you know, the George Floyd situation. Other, you know, Ahmaud Arbery, which is the trial, the jury selection is taking place in the United States right now for that, which happened in Georgia, and that actually happened a few months before the George Floyd situation, and Breonna Taylor, which happened a year before. So these dynamics, you know, a combination of all these, you know, these senseless killings, you know, basically resulting, I think, of people saying, you know, enough is enough, and we cannot continue to see these type of, this blatant disregard for Black lives. You know?
And in a sense, it seems to me one of the big changes, because obviously we had major civil unrest in relation to civil rights and the racial dynamics in the 60s. Then again in the 90s surrounding, I suppose, you know, the LA riots and things like that, and the issues with that. And then again, of course, more recently in like 2019, 2020. And it seems like the makeup of the people who are involved in the protest movements has changed over time. It's much more diverse now, it seems. And one of the things that I've read, and I think you've spoken on this, so it'd be good to get your perspective on it, is the impact of social media on civil unrest and on these social movements, how that's kind of changed not only the dynamic of who's involved in these movements, but just in the capacity that, you know, when that tragic murder of George Floyd took place, or pre sort of issues as well. It's kind of it's not, it's like business as usual in a sense, but the big change is that now globally, instantaneously, within, you know, a matter of hours, millions of people, you know, were able to see that like their own eyes, and I think that has a profound effect. So although it creates a lot of negative, I think social media probably has quite a profound impact on, you know, the movements that have been taking place in the last few years. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we saw that with Ferguson, with Michael Brown several years ago, the Ferguson situation. I mean, social media, these things have always been happening. The reality is now with social media, it's much more, you know, in a matter of minutes, it can be, you know, broadcast across the entire world. And I mean, so social media is very good in that sense. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of social media. I use it. I think like anything else, it can be a double-edged sword. It can also be used because people can use it for, you know, while every progressive movement can use it, or a person with good intentions, there's somebody who may have sinister motives who can use it as well. So I mean, you know, so social media, like I said, you know, like anything else, it can be used for people with, you know, noble purposes, but can also be utilized by people who have more sinister purposes. So I think that as well. But no, there's no doubt that social media was a very, very major, crucial factor in, you know, expediting a lot of these injustices when they occur and these violent, these situations, and it helps to galvanize the masses who are determined or willing to, you know, confront such, you know, blatant violations of human, you know, dignity. And I think, yes, I think that was very, very a good example of how it, you know, responded to the George Floyd situation. And I think also what you saw with the George Floyd situation, like you said, it sparked so many people from all walks of life. You know, not even here in the United States, but globally, you know, internationally, I guess in Britain, your native Britain, you know, I think that other places as well throughout the world, you know, even in Asia, you know, and even in small town America, you know, towns in the United States where there are very few, if any, Black people, you know, you had, you know, people white saying Black Lives Matter, you know, you had people really, so really that struck a chord with a lot of people, the George Floyd murder. And I think, like I said, because I think it was a combination of the pandemic, a combination of people just seeing the brutality of it, the senselessness of it, the sadisticness of it, and I think it really did. And also, you know, you had, I think in Minneapolis, the torturing and the burning down of the police station, I think that, I think that also prompted corporate America to get into it, saying, well, they saw, people from every aspect of, the corporate America is not foolish. They realize themselves, well, as long as it was just a group of black people or, a marginalized group of people protested, well, but when they saw whites, upper class whites, wealthy whites, people globally, they looked and said, well, we got to get here and make a statement. We want to make a statement because it's, it's about their dollar bills, those type of things as well. It's about, it all came down to money, whether their intentions were mercenary or not, they're altruistic. The reality is they were certainly, knows how a lot of corporations weighed in with statements and the dynamics, and stuff as well. We believe in, this stuff, we believe in equality and what happened to George Floyd was injustice and all this type of stuff because they were thinking about, their products.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it felt like everybody in the world had to write a draft a statement instantaneously, and I did feel that, but I was very jaded in some respects. And I feel like from some of your writing, I get the impression that you are both hopeful for the future, but also kind of like pessimistic. So, yeah, how do you feel hopeful for the future? And do you think, as a black man in America, you have, and as you've been in the education system since '97, and you've been in different states, you've been at the forefront of it for a long time. Do you feel that this is the time when we're going to actually see some real change? And do you feel hopeful about that? And also, I'd like to say from a publishing perspective and from another representative of academia, what can we do to affect the change? As publishers, as scholars, as writers, other than the obvious, what can we really do to help affect actual quantifiable change and change for good, rather than just till the next cycle?
Well, I'll start with your first question. Yes, I feel that I tend to be a little more of an optimist about things. I think as well. There's always a little bit of cynicism there, but I think that we kind of have to remain optimistic on some level. These past several years, or past few years rather, have made me giving me pause. The Trump years, about the. I never was naive about racism. I knew it was a strong undercurrent of it before, but I think that just the level of hostility, resistance toward different people. I think that white supremacy, it just shows it's on its dying breath, and it's like a wounded dog with a chain. And they'll, when people feel they have nothing to lose or in their last dying breath, they will go to that extent to do what they can, and we're seeing that right now on different levels. So yes, I think that I'm still optimistic, but I do realize there's still a strong segment of people who are willing to try to maintain the status quo, and they're not willing to share any type of power, and as well. But I feel that and to answer your second question about what the publishing industry can do. Well, the publishing industry can do several things. It can still continue to always be on an effort to publish works on race and things as well. Not to visit race whenever it's popular in the public sphere. I mean, I realize the publishing industry is like other industries on some level. It's about, the marketplace and what's going to drive it, but I also realize too, in an effort to deal with an issue that is important to race, it needs to be constant, and it needs to be a constant constant stream of books being on the subject, no matter what's going on in the zeitgeist. It just can't be, well, race is back in the popular culture now, so we'll just publish a bunch of books on race. Nobody's talking about race that much anymore now, so we're not going to publish it. I don't think that does anybody a service. The race is something in our society we have to deal with all the time. Same thing with gender. Those type of things. Those are issues that always need to have books published, regardless of the climate and the zeitgeist. There has to be a continuation of those type of publications, and also looking at it from varied perspectives as well. It's not one way of looking at it. We have to look at it from a perspective that is going to be perspectives rather that are going to be open to the public, and also people who may come in from different angles, because that is a way of also re-examining yourself and saying, well, I never thought about it this way, and there may be person A might make a good idea, but person B may also make a good idea and may also have ideas that we need to consider.
Very good point indeed. I think with the publishing perspective is things outside of maybe the more traditional constructs and concepts around race, and now we're seeing things from like, you know, multiple different perspectives, where, you know, black trans lives, for example, or you know, African American drag performers, and we're seeing a lot of work on things of that nature, for example. So it's these and that's much more common now, I think, and that's something which I've been finding to be a wealth of depth of really interesting, and you know, interdisciplinary research coming out with race at the center. You know, perhaps, like, you know, again, we were just interviewing one of our authors about our book Reclaiming Ballet, and you know, you're looking at the traditional art form of ballet, but looking at all the different histories and all the different practitioners and people who've been involved in it, who perhaps didn't quite get the shine that they deserve because they weren't brought to the center of the discussion, and things like that have changed. But speaking of books, let's jump in to talk a little bit about your book, which came out in 2019, published by Intellect. So do you want to just well, I tell you what, it's really interesting because you talk about so many things that have been very prominent over the past 10 years. You do that in a very dynamic and an interesting, open fashion. It's not your traditional academic book, that's for sure. Definitely more of a discussion, more polemic pieces from your perspective. I love it. It's also received many fantastic reviews, and of course, while initially it had a strong trajectory and was selling well, and we were getting good reviews and things. Of course, in light of, you know, the shift in the media attention to some of the subjects, as I say, you were ahead of the curve, you know, and I congratulate you for that. And so many of these issues center stage, and of course now the book's having a much longer life cycle than an average publication, because, you know, the examples are still in the news. You know, things like, you know, singer R. Kelly, Bill Cosby, issues reparations, the Black Lives Matter movement, of course former President Donald Trump, the Obamas, black intellectualism, police brutality. Many of these kids discussed in the book. But in your own words, can you tell us what the book's about? You know, how it came about, how it, you know, where the ideas just gestated from, and just yeah, let us know a little bit about it in your own words.
Sure. I am, like I said, I am I also am I'm a, I guess you could say, contributing writer. I write for different newspapers and things as well. You know, just recently signed a contract with Cable Syndicate. So, you know, like I said as well. So, you know, a syndication company, and I write about you know, race, gender, pop culture, those type of topics. And I decided to say to look at a lot of the pieces I was writing. I said, you know, there's definitely I felt, you know, individuals, a lot of times, I heard a couple of individuals who I used to get emails from when they saw my columns, you know, you really need to, you know, write a book on these topics, because you said, you guys are really good ideas. You need to assemble these into a book, and the like. And I said, well, you know, there might be something to that. And then it just happened to be about a couple weeks later, I met you at Pop Culture. I mean, I had not just met you, we had met each other years before, but I talked to you about this.
We've been on the circuit together for many moons now, that's for sure.
And by this time we had known each other about 3 or 4 years, you know. So it was, like I said, it wasn't like we just met. But like I said, and talked to you about the idea of, you know, submitting a manuscript. And you said, well, I like the idea. It sounds good. I think we had a couple of drinks about it, and you know, stuff as well. And I submitted you the manuscript, and you know, you got back to me about a month and a half later. And I guess the board of Intellect, you know, and the Chicago Press said we gave it a thumbs up, and I was happy. Like I said, and we kind of went from there, like I said as well. You know, I think that you know, one of the without going too much into the review, the review aspects of it, we know, you and I know about that. We don't need to talk about that too much. We'll keep that private. But
I mean, we should clarify that a little bit. So you received initially mixed reviews from the peer reviews from the academic community, because a couple of them didn't necessarily grasp what you were trying to achieve, and through the style of writing. I think that's, you know, we can give them a negative review rather than you, I think, because I think, to your credit, and obviously there was, you know, we worked together in terms of editorial with Tim, my colleagues as well, to kind of create the right kind of vibe and feeling for the publication. But, you know, the proof's in the pudding. It's performing well. There's a lot of interest, and of course we're receiving some rave reviews from various different media outlets. So, and you know, and again, it's right there on the money in terms of the case studies you use, the subjects you focus upon, the topics discussed, and then it's just good to get it from, you know, for once to have someone's opinion as well. It's well, within a more of an academic context, I should say. That's kind of been it was a really it's an eye-opening insight, I think, into issues surrounding contemporary race in America. But well,
also I think I wanted to answer your second question. I think that is the factor how that came about, and I decided to address the issues I thought they really need to be addressed in the the Obama Trump era. So.
Well, look, I want to go into it in a bit more detail. So, sure. First of all, I wanted to ask about the style, how you would describe it in terms of the writing, and if you took any influence from any other writer, who were your influences when it came to writing in this style, or who had an impact on your own scholarship or your own writing style over the years.
Actually, I don't know if I've had any. There are certain writers I'd like to read, and certain columns who I like to read and stuff. But I think I've always had, actually, a lot of people have told me I always have my own style. They say one thing about, even when I was in high school, and in college, a lot of the teachers say, they would know it was my paper because they said they would have to even look at the name. They wouldn't have to look at the name. They would just know it's my style because they said, you have a certain style to your writing. I know it's you.
It's quite a service.
Right. So yes, I guess, and I think that so that in and of itself, I think I kind of had, I was fortunate enough to find my own voice, and I think that that was very, very me. So, but as far as people I admire, and as far as intellectuals, there are a number. I mean, I think James Baldwin. I mean, and he's back in the culture now. He's never went away totally, but he's definitely, Eddie Glaude has had a lot to do with bringing him back to the culture, and stuff as well. But James Baldwin, Algie Lord, who's people are quoting her almost 30 years after her death. The master's tools that never dismantled the master's house. The war against dehumanization is ceaseless. I mean, she has some profound. The woman was just brilliant. I'd say, Frederick Douglass. Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, I'd say, the list goes on and on. I mean, there's so many influences, and Plato, there, 19th century, I mean, so there's just so many, individuals that I think that I've really admired, who have been, who dealt in America at a time where racism was much, much more legally. Discrimination was legally illegal. They had to deal with it in America. Some of them went abroad because of the racism in America at that time and lived abroad, like Baldwin and others. But I mean, people had to deal with the deeply entrenched legal racism. So they were able to fight against tremendous odds to achieve what they did. I mean, those are people I really have a lot of admiration for, and I think as well. So I mean, there's so I think that there's just a number of people I guess I can name, but those are some of the ones that come to mind. But to my writing, like I said, I just think that that is another thing I believe that the publishing industry can also do too. I think it's important to publish work that can also be of use and can be receptive to a larger audience. And that was one thing about this. The reviews I noticed with the book were like, the books, the book is definitely writes for, he knows an academic audience, but he also writes the words that are accessible to the public. And I thought that was definitely a double compliment. Because I think a lot of times, too many publishers, it's almost like they want the most thickest jargony type, and I was like, that's going to sell books to maybe a small segment of people, and they're going to find themselves on library shelves, but yeah. I think you want to write books that people can, because to me it doesn't make any, if you want to get your point across, I think it's nothing wrong with being a public intellectual. And there's some academics who frown upon that and felt, I was like, well, to me that makes no sense. Why would you want to be an academic and just only speak to each other? I mean, who's that really benefiting? Is that just stroking your ego, or what is that doing? But the public should be able to the public should be able to connect to your work too. I mean, that's I think you're not doing a service to anybody else, and that's been one of the criticisms of academia. They write work, they don't speak in a public voice, they speak to each other, and their work is irrelevant to the large society. And academia is going to have to become more relevant. Otherwise, you are going to see the discipline under continued attack, and not you're going to have to make the case to the public. Why should we be spending tax dollars for the public institutions to fund such an institution that's not having any relevance to the large society?
I completely agree with you. I think it only services the ivory tower, and I think that's very problematic for many reasons. And I think to many publishers are too ready to help proliferate that and that tone and that, you know, that like I said, that overly academic tone, which does, it excludes people, and excludes a lot of people. And again, it's one of the things I feel that maybe has led to this, especially in kind of the Western world, like Northern Hemisphere in particular. I think this idea of we don't need experts, or we've had enough of experts, you know, and I think that's where these populist leaders obviously have come to have much more kind of power as well, because there's this distrust for intelligentsia, for academia, scholarship, for education, for science. And there's become kind of profound distrust for that in many senses. And I think that with publishers, as academics and as writers, we have to really kind of try to regain that trust and to open things up. And I think what your book does is it certainly achieves that in many ways. And I congratulate you on that. I think it's something that we're looking to do at Intellect, is we've always tried to have that balance, and try to make it right with you know, without too much jargon, or overly complicated academic, you know, sort of verbose sentences and things of that nature, to try to reach a wider audience. That's fundamentally, you know, vital, and it's vital to the survival of publishers in the publishing industry, as well as to the future of the scholarship, because, you know, the book market is more problematic than ever, and we can't be in the business of excluding potential customers, but also potential contributors to widen the community for people who are interested in this kind of research. So no, I applaud you for the work that you've done. That's really important, and I just say to the audience, the style is fantastic, and I'd recommend that people pick up the book and take a read, because again, you don't even need to read the whole thing. You can just dip in and read one of the case studies, which leads me to the case studies. So tell us a little about those, because I think, you know, for want of a better term, you picked a load of winners there, because there was, you know, inordinate number of things you could discuss, but in some of these contexts, pre their, you know, their mainstream kind of emergence, same degree that they are now, but you know, you really have hit a lot of important case studies. So tell us a bit about a few of them, you know, things like Colin Kaepernick and, you know, your discussion of masculinity. Yeah, why don't you highlight a few of the case studies and why you picked them, and what makes them intriguing to you?
Well, the Colin Kaepernick case is what I picked because I thought I looked at the example of a classic hypocrisy of those who were criticizing Colin Kaepernick for exercising his First Amendment rights, but yet they were doing the same thing. You know, they were criticizing him, but yet they felt he should not be critical. That, you know, well, it's okay for us to exercise our First Amendment rights, but you should not be exercising yours. I don't know if even they realized what they were doing. So I said I thought that was a classic example of hypocrisy, and also I think a lot of it came in. There was the racism that came in with it as well. But I mean, it was like, you know, well, you know, so some of the things, the exact same things you all are criticizing Kaepernick for, Mr. Kaepernick for, you're doing the exact same thing. You know, so I mean, you know, this is rank hypocrisy, and also came with it. Also looked at the racial aspects of it as well. You know, like I said as well, and I think that was, to me, was very, very troublesome and problematic. And I exposed the hypocrisy, I think, of that particular situation. And actually, I think that appeared on Yahoo. It got before initially the bigger piece. And you know, you can imagine the comments. You got, you know, negative comments. Some people call me being an idiot and all this kind of stuff. And all this, you know, like I said, you know, that's usually the last refuge of a deficient scoundrel who cannot, you know, if you got to respond to people idiots without any kind of cogent argument, then yeah. They lost the argument. So anyway, you know, so, but I feel that that's why I chose that particular piece to expose, you know, the hypocrisy and the double standards of it. The other piece, you know, there's some other pieces in there I chose that there's several in there. I looked at the R. Kelly particular piece in the sense that it looked at and he just was convicted recently as well, but on the how Black women in our society have always been kind of marginalized, you know, like, you know, R. Kelly's victims mostly were young Black girls. And to me, nobody paid attention to it except for Jim DeRogatis, the Chicago Tribune reporter, had been writing about this for 20 years, you know, long before that, the Chicago Tribune. But a lot of the cases that R. Kelly, you know, when he went to trial, they were dismissed or whatever, you know, hung juries, whatever, because nobody really, but the bottom line was, nobody cared about those little girls. They were Black. Had they been, and I guarantee if R. Kelly's victims have been young white girls, or particularly white middle-class girls, you know, let's say middle class or higher, he would have been in jail. You know, or even worse, probably, you know, like I said, you know, not as he should have been, no matter if they were young or young and underage. But the reality is, nobody, there were poor Black girls, and that showed you how the young Black girls and even poorer girls in general tend to be marginalized. We're kind of seeing that with the Gabby Petito's tragic as that case was, these are upscale kids, young kids, I call them kids in their 20s compared to me, I'm in my 50s. But I mean, young scale, upscale kids, who could travel across the country throughout the summer and everything else. And stuff. Well, the reality is this doesn't negate the tragedy that we felt her. It was terrible, and by no means. But I think to me, but she was attractive, young, upscale stuff. But I guarantee you, she'd been working class black woman or working class white woman probably, or not, or even in a case unattractive, or not as older or whatever, or maybe LGBTQ or whatever, would that case have got that type of attention? And I question whether it would have, so I think it shows you where R. Kelly showed, the marginalization and objectification of black women was okay. Other essays that I wrote about, I looked at any particular essay you want me to discuss in particular, or
No, just I mean, just maybe just want a couple that you're particularly proud of, or that you feel had more, have a lot of resonance right now, and maybe that our audience.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you want to highlight, really. It's your work of art.
I think the John Lewis essay I thought was, devoting with the late John Lewis, how voting rights right now is still back in the public eye, and the Congress still not passed that yet. And to look about, what these individuals like John Lewis have had to do to, get voting rights. These are people who endured, houses being bombed, death threats, cattle prods, and everything else just for the right to vote half a century ago. And now, more than half a century later, these rights could still be in jeopardy, and the vast majority of us who are living today, the vast majority of black people in this country, myself included, and the vast majority, a number of people were not even alive when they were trying to get these rights enacted for us as human beings. And now, we're seeing, these rights are still under attack, they're trying to make it more difficult to vote, with voter suppression laws as well. So I thought the John Lewis essay, has resonated on that as well. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think that particular piece, she was a freshman senator in Congress right now as well, and how the right wing seemed to be obsessed with her. Just seemed to she just seemed to, it's something about her that she gets under their skin, she's a very, very, and I was like, I think she represents a lot of things they don't necessarily, she's, well, particularly among some of the more sexist males in there, she's Latina, she's outspoken, she's a liberal, she calls herself a democratic socialist, highly intelligent, it seems like to me these would be the kind of people the conservatives seem to like. They believe in that they give the rhetoric about this self-made person. I mean, she's a kind of, her racial algorithm might be a little strong, but she's a classic example of somebody who was a woman who was a bartender part-time. I think she was a secretary too, but a part-time bartender, and now she's in Congress. I mean, that's a tremendous success story. And I mean, she defeated the fourth highest ranking Congressperson to get there, and as well. So I think she's, and I think I also put in my essay that I remember. I think a lot of the Republican guys, I think a lot of them have a crush on her. I mean, but I think they don't, and I think they resent themselves for it. I think they, and I think that's what I think that's what it is. But I think that so I think I look at how she's been very, very a maverick as well, and how she's been able to do that. That's what the essays I particularly was very like. That was the essay. A lot of people emailed me about that particular essay. They seemed to like that one on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And I look at the Bill Maher. I think I've essayed him on Bill Maher and the N-word debate, the nigger word debate. I look at that one and stuff as well. And Bill Maher lately has been very critical of the left, in a lot of ways. He's certainly always been critical of the right, but about the cancel culture and those dynamics and things as well. But I think I look at the Bill Maher, how he used the word, the N-word. Like I said, when he used the N-word nigger, I think that I know he was using it in jest. Some people were very, very offended by it, but I don't think it was done with malicious intent. And how I mean that was, it was like, he wasn't calling anybody, he was being flippant, but he has to realize when those lips come from when that word comes from the lips of a person who's not white, who's not black, you need to really be, you better have a good reason why you said it. It better be used in the proper context. And yes, you can use the word the nigger in the proper context. If you're quoting literature, if you're quoting something somebody said, I don't see any problem with anybody using that word. If you're quoting, like, James Baldwin used the word nigger in some of his works and stuff as well, but he was using it in context. So if you're quoting a white professor or somebody's quoting a work or using a work somebody else said, that's fine. But just to casually throw out the word that way, no, I don't think that's really appropriate if you're not black. You know what I'm saying? Yes, I realize we have free speech. People say, well, I can use the word. Why can't I use the word? No, you can use the word. but there may be consequences for you using that
Yeah,
word.
yeah.
Nobody can stop you for using that word, but there could be consequences for doing it. A man can call a woman the B word, the C word, but guess what? There might be some consequences for it. In addition to being slapped, there might be some other cases,
True.
that come along with it. But I think that
Yeah.
that is what I see with that particular essay. I thought it got a lot of responses too. I mean, when people reviewed the book, that was one of the ones that people were referred to in particular. And the reparations, I thought I was really happy with that one. I think that was the one I think that had definitely be included in the book, because I think the reparations to me is like that's a topic that comes back into the culture every now and then about reparations. And my take on reparations, I felt, was yes, we need reparations, but we need reparations not so much in giving people a check of a certain age. I did say people who are like 70 old or whatever, yes, give them a check, because they're not going to probably live long enough to deal. Those people have dealt with all kind of blatant discrimination, but people, 25, 30, 35 with, affirmative action programs, business development deals, those type reparations, free college tuition, loan forgiveness, that kind of reparation, I think, is to have much longer impact, as opposed to just giving somebody like that a check. I think so. My definition of reparations is a little more broader than just specifically issuing checks to people.
Yeah, something edifying, like something that will actually allow you to progress yourself individually, your family, and your culture. Kind of,
it would have much more tangible results.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible way of looking at it, for sure. I know that's, again, is a hot topic, both within the African American culture, but also just within America in general. But no, I just wanted to go back. Because you just mentioned cancel culture, I'd just be interested. What's your perspective on cancel culture? Because again, it's been with Dave Chappelle. Recently with his final Netflix documentary, this has very much been in the news, whether Dave Chappelle's, too successfully cancelled, or whether he's just too clever to allow it to happen, but I mean, it's been quite contentious. And of course, the subjects that he's discussing and his self-referential back to pre-existing jokes and narratives, it's kind of interesting. So it'd be good to get, well, I'll tell you what, it'd be good to get your perspective on cancel culture, but then perhaps also specifically about Dave Chappelle and what your perspective on that is as well. If you've seen it, of course, if you've
Well, no, I haven't seen the such yet, but I think but the cancel culture to me is kind of a very it's kind of almost like political correctness. It's almost like a red herring in some cases. To me, it's like who's canceling who? I said that to me is there are people who are very, very who want to, if you don't, I guess, let me back up. There are people, if you don't speak in the manner they want you to speak in, or don't have the viewpoint they want to, they do want to cancel you. But I think cancel culture has been seen as kind of a product of the left. But no, I think the right is just as quick to try to cancel others as well. I mean, the right is quickly, to try to cancel. So I think it's a bipartisan issue. So I don't think any side has a monopoly on cancel culture. But I think, to me, I think it's just something that, to me, I don't really subscribe to. I ignore it, like I say, because I'm going to say what I want to say. So you can cancel me like Dave Chappelle said, cancel me if you want to. Like I said, but I mean, some people necessarily can't be canceled. I mean, I think cancel culture. I think somebody like Harvey Weinstein, what he did, yes, he should have been canceled. I mean, what he did was a disgrace. I mean, I think that some individuals like that, I think the culture like that, that doesn't mean some people should not be canceled, but I think, you all have to look at it. I think, to me, cancel culture is something that has to be looked at from a case-by-case basis.
I kind of subscribe to that same philosophy. I also think, it's cancel culture, linking with what you said, has come out of this, the fact that the right and the left, for want of better terms, sort of liberals and Republicans, conservatives, however you want to phrase it, they've become more, I wouldn't use the word extreme, they're in their own echo chambers a lot more, for many multitude of reasons. And I feel that we've definitely lost that consensus and that middle ground to some degree, especially in certain echelons of society. And that, I think, has helped fuel some of the cancel culture. But it's definitely a complicated issue. And I think, depending on what you're cancelling and who's cancelling who, there's a lot nuances involved in there.
I did want to go back to something you said earlier about
Yeah.
intellectualism, if you don't mind. Thank you. The intellect. There's always been an anti-intellectual streak in our world. I don't think it's just in our current era. I think we've always there's always been a society. Certain segments of society rather have always been hostile toward intellectuals, and that's nothing new. I do think that a lot of times, leaders and people, fascist leaders, I did as well, capitalize on that anti-intellectualism. We've seen that, and I think as well. So I think that's nothing new there as well. So I think that is I just want to say I think that is always been there, but that's something that has to be fought. But I think there's always been an anti-intellectual streak in certain segments of society. I don't think that's anything new there.
No, I think that's a point well made. Yeah, definitely. I feel it's been used to galvanize, people's support base a lot in current society. But I agree that it has been something that's been utilized by, especially by populist leaders.
Well, as a historian, I'm a historian by training. There are a lot of eerie things that were happening in the 1850s in America that are happening today. The Know Nothing parties, talk of secession, and those type of things were really happening. Media intensive covering issues and stuff. And I think after the Civil War, after the 1850s, we went into a Civil War. And I think my concerns is we might be hitting a Civil War, not a war between the states like we did in the 19th century. But I think Edgar Allan Poe said it best: history does not necessarily exactly repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think we could see certain aspects of that type of behavior, because I think we're headed toward it now. Because I think the culture is so fragmented, and I think the hostility is just so raw. And I think that heaven forbid, I think we could see a sniper attacks and buildings being blown up and those type of things. I think you're going to see that type of civil war as opposed to any kind of war between the states. And I think that if we're not careful, I think because right now I think the temperature really has to be lowered. I think it's really, temperature is really, really high right now. It's real hot, and it's got to cool down.
Yeah, I heard you. I actually like there's an analogy there you've used in your writing where you've described it. I believe I'm going to misquote you, so excuse me, but it's kind of like described as an inferno, right? Or the over the last 10 years, there has become like so much heat within society as a result of some of these issues. I thought I had it written down, but I've forgotten that. It's just a really powerful statement that you have made. I've heard you say it in different terms a few times, but it kind of basically is a very profound way of saying what you just have. And yeah, I think again you seem to have very rational fears there about how things could develop, especially in light of maybe 2024 and with presidential elections and things of that nature. Definitely a tumultuous time, that's for sure. What I did want to, especially now that we've just mentioned Chappelle as well, I did want to add, in regards to the book, in hindsight, since writing the book, who would you now include as subject for case studies? Is there anyone who you're like, oh yeah, I really wish I wish I could, or basically, I guess I'm saying, I'm priming you for a second edition. Maybe there's need for a second edition. Maybe we need another selection of case studies. But yeah, I mean, just who would you want to focus on? What subjects or individuals would you want to focus on in light of what's taken place over the last few years, or just in what's going on at the moment? What would you write about?
I'll probably say, obviously, the George Floyd situation would be something I'd be looking at. Probably, the MAGA supporters, the January 6th insurrection. I think that's something that would be an essay that should be looked into. More recent with Josh Gruden, the NFL, racing within the NFL, the largest sports, racing with corporate culture. Those would be some of the topics I think that I'd be interested in looking at. And Dave Chappelle, I think, he'd be a topic I'd be interested in looking at. And I didn't get to answer your question there. Dave Chappelle, to me, Dave Chappelle's a brilliant comedian. He's one of my favorite comedians. I think he's really brilliant.
He's a great comedian, yeah.
And I think he's one thing about Dave Chappelle, what I kind of like at Dave Chappelle is like, whereas a lot of other comedians, I think like Richard Pryor, the late Richard, who was a great comedian to be sure, and all like those kind of things, but they kind of played into white supremacist sentiment. They made some evil white supremacists comfortable. Black people comfortable, but they made white supremacists comfortable. Dave Chappelle, to quote Paul Mooney, the late great Paul Mooney, Dave Chappelle, he was kind of the pimp of comedy. He was basically pimping out other people. Basically he was subjected Jew. He was like, he's coming at you, whereas he was able to, he was the one who was in charge of what he was saying. And he said some pretty blunt things. I mean, he was barely, he touched some very, very controversial topics. That a lot of some comedians I think would have been really reluctant to do. There were a couple of things he did that I thought he went a little too far with. The blackface skit he did one time, even himself, he didn't. He thought that was a mistake. Other than that, but he also said himself he felt that even though despite the brilliance of his comedy, he felt that a lot of whites were not getting the message across. He thought he thought he was trying to make whites uncomfortable with some of his comedy. But on the other hand, he felt that somehow it was having the adverse effect. They thought it was really, really hilarious. They weren't really getting a serious message. I mean, that's what he was saying. So I think that that's why after the first year of the Chappelle Show, I guess he decided not to go any further. I also think too there were a lot of dynamics there as well. I think the first year, I mean, talk about the zeitgeist. I mean, I was just happened to be watching. I was going through comedy, I just happened to tune in at night. It was not too much on TV, and I just saw the Comedy Central Chappelle Show. And I think like everybody else, I think everybody just found it at once, And I think it was like, this is a really great show. It's funny, and I started watching every Wednesday, and I think it was just like, I think people just word of mouth, and I think they just started watching it because it was just something I think everybody just literally tuned in. It was almost like a meteor that hit the sky, and everybody just went outside the backyard and started watching it. You're like, what is this? This is really, really phenomenal work, and I don't think he probably could have kept that level of over another year. I think he probably felt, because people would have said, well, it wasn't as good as the first year. That season was okay. But I think when you have something that every episode was just like a knocked out of the park, every episode was just like a tour de force. And I think it was going to be awful hard to keep that up.
Yeah, I think on with the industry as well, wasn't there? And again, there's just the powers that be and things and the pressures he was under. I can imagine it's a complicated situation in itself, but yeah, I feel like the industry definitely put a lot of pressure on him. It wasn't just he didn't just choose to. I know he chose to walk away, but I don't think it was he was having some kind of breakdown. I think he was pushed as well. One thing I did read, actually, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's called the One App, and basically it was another comedian, Cypher Sounds, and a radio personality, Peter Rosenberg, talking about cancel culture and about the Chappelle jokes, especially about trans people, and how that could be certainly offensive to people from that community. But it was interesting. One of the critiques they had, even though they're both big fans, and Cypher Sounds actually is one of his warm-up guys, they were saying it's interesting because this last one, not to give it away too much, but it almost a TED talk in places. So there's not really jokes or punchlines. It's more of a story. And a lot of people have become to his defense saying, well, it's humor, it's jokes, and it's our we need to break things down and make jokes out of them. But then a lot of other people saying, well, there weren't enough jokes. Basically, it was more of an opinion piece, more of a TED talk, and that was him utilizing celebrity to depending on what side of the aisle you're on with this argument. It was just kind of it was interesting. So yeah, One App is Dead. There's an interesting piece on comedy and culture and the Chappelle special, if anyone out there is interested. I just want to say we've only got a few minutes left, and it's been great talking about the book, but I've got more questions, but also if anyone in the audience has any questions to put to Elwood, we have been discussing issues surrounding contemporary race in America. Elwood's back, a book, Keeping It Real. Elwood will be back with another book, I'm sure, too. Cancel culture, Dave Chappelle, all kinds of stuff. So if anyone doesn't have any questions, just drop them in the comments section. Try to get to them in these last few minutes. I would just like to thank you for joining us as well. It's been a really interesting conversation here with Elwood. But Elwood, why don't you tell us a little bit about projects you're working on right now? What's next for you?
Well, I just had a book that came out about a month ago called Talking to You, Bro. Candid advice on men in the 21st century, how to liberate yourself from the constraints that society puts on men, stuff is expectations. And I'm also working on a book on Generation X men. That's been those of us who were born between 1965 and 1980. So, Generation X men of that's why I've interviewed a number of men on those. So that's gonna be my next project. One just came out, but the current project I'm in is on Generation X men, like I said as well. And race is always a topic I'll always be revisiting and stuff as well. So like I said, that is but right now my current topic is looking at men of Generation X. And then,
well, without giving it away too much, obviously we want people to go and check out the book. But is there a criteria masculinity? What are your findings, or what is your thesis?
Yes, there is. I mean, I think there is a crisis of masculinity. I think there's always been a crisis of masculinity, but I think that, it's definitely. I'm looking at, I look at the different chapters, different sections of the book. It's about 36 essays in all, and it looks at different types, men in relationships, men in race, men in depression, those type of things as well. So the different essays that look at a variety of different topics as it relates to men in the contemporary era.
Wonderful. Well,
thank you.
Well, it doesn't seem like any questions right now, so we're past the hour. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today, Elwood.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. So yeah, my guest today, Dr. Elwood Watson. Check out his book, Keeping It Real. You can get that from intellectbooks.com. It's actually on promotion at the moment as part of our celebrations of Black History Month, so you can get yourself a discount on that too. Do check out Elwood's other work, fascinating, and across very multiple different disciplines. I like the interdisciplinary nature, things like gender, race, masculinity, and different generations. It's all fascinating stuff. So Elwood, thank you so much for joining me. Have a good rest.
Thank you, James. It's great to connect again, and I look forward to seeing you at PCA, and hopefully we'll have it in Seattle this year. And if not before, I'll certainly be in touch with you before. But thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And we will be closing out our celebrations of Black History Month. I'll keep the guest a secret, but do keep an eye on the Instagram feed, because that will be getting posted over the next couple of days. And I think that's going to be more of a focus on diaspora. So yeah, definitely tune in. It'll be this week, I believe. Oh, actually next Wednesday, I think so. So just keep an eye on the Instagram. Again, Elwood, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and some real good food for thought there, Elwood. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Cheers. Bye.